The deed landed on the table between them like a thrown knife. Ruby Grayson stared at the paper, her fingers pressed flat against the rough wood, her breathing so shallow and sharp it barely moved the dust motes drifting in the afternoon light through the assay office window. The ink was dry. The wax seal was official. The date at the top reads September 14th, 1878, Colfax County, New Mexico Territory. And Harvey Sutton's name was written there in a clerk's careful hand, right above a description of land that made her stomach drop straight through the floorboards. Not her land, his land. The land he had been offered 3 weeks ago. The land she had not known he refused. She raised her eyes to him slowly, the way a person looks at someone they thought they understood and suddenly do not recognize at all. Harvey stood near the door, hat in his hand, jaw set, watching her with those quiet dark eyes that never once told her everything they held. He was lean and sun-worn, his shirt dusty from the trail, and he looked at her the way a man looks at something he has been bracing to lose. "You turned it down," Ruby said. Her voice came out low and flat, stripped of the emotion pressing behind it. "The Harker parcel, 40 acres of prime bottomland with a creek running through it, you turned it down." Harvey did not deny it. "Yes. You turned it down and you took the claim next to mine instead." She pushed the deed back across the table toward him, not because she was done with it, but because she could not keep looking at it. "Why?" The silence between them was the kind that has weight. Outside, Cimarron's main street rumbled on a mule cart, a shouting merchant, the distant crack of someone splitting wood. Inside this narrow office that smelled of dust and beeswax and old paper, there was nothing but that silence and what it contained. Harvey Sutton looked at the woman who had infuriated him, challenged him, impressed him, and quietly undone him over the last 8 months. He looked at Ruby Grayson, who had come out to this territory with nothing but a homestead claim, a dead father's surveying tools, and a stubbornness that could have stopped the Rio Grande. And he said the truest thing he had said to another human being in nearly 4 years. "Because I was not ready to be that far from you." Ruby's hand closed into a fist on the table. She had not expected that. She had expected an excuse, a practical reason, something about water rights or soil or proximity to the road. She had not expected the truth delivered that quietly, that plainly, without flourish or apology. She stood up from her chair. She walked to the window. She looked out at the street she had walked every day for 8 months, learning every rut and plank and face, building a life in a place that had not wanted her at first, and she breathed until the feeling in her chest became something she could name. It was not anger. It was closer to awe. And beneath the awe, something that had been sitting unnamed in her chest for months shifted and settled into place like a stone finding the bottom of a riverbed. She turned around and looked at Harvey Sutton and said, "That was a foolish thing to do." "I know it," he said. "You gave up the better land. I know it. For me. For the chance of you," he said carefully. "That's the honest answer." Ruby Grayson, who had not cried once since her father's funeral 16 months ago, felt something sting behind her eyes that she absolutely refused to acknowledge. She straightened her spine. She looked at the man who had quietly rearranged his entire future for a chance that she had not even known she was offering. And that is where the story truly begins. Not at this desk, with this deed, with this devastating and tender truth laid open between them. It begins 8 months earlier, on a road outside Cimarron in the New Mexico Territory, when everything was still a contest, and a fight, and neither of them had admitted yet that they were circling something they both desperately wanted. It was the 13th of January, 1878, when Ruby Grayson arrived in Cimarron, and the town did not stop moving long enough to notice her. She rode in on a rented horse from Springer, which was the nearest railroad stop, with her saddlebag stuffed full of papers and her father's old compass strapped to her belt. The compass was brass, heavy, scratched from years of field use, and it had belonged to Thomas Grayson, surveyor and dreamer, and the man who had staked a homestead claim in Colfax County 2 years before he died of a burst appendix in a boarding house in Santa Fe. Ruby was 26 years old, trained in the field since she was old enough to hold a measuring chain, and she had inherited that claim, those tools, and a debt to the First National Bank of Taos that required her to make the land produce or lose it entirely. She was not a woman given to sentiment on the road. She surveyed the town of Cimarron with the same methodical attention she gave to topographic features. 2 hotels, a general store, a saloon that advertised itself without embarrassment, a land office, a church under construction, and approximately 3 dozen people going about their Monday morning business. Colfax County was territory in transformation. The Maxwell land grant dispute had been churning through the courts and through the streets for years, leaving ordinary homesteaders in a state of perpetual legal uncertainty. Ruby knew this before she came. She had done her research, read the newspapers, spoken to her father's attorney in Santa Fe. She knew the risks. What she had not accounted for was Harvey Sutton. She met him at the land office on her second day in town, when he was arguing with the clerk about boundary markers, and she was waiting at the counter with her own paperwork. He was taller than she had initially noticed when he walked in, the kind of tall that does not announce itself but fills a room by its presence. His voice was controlled and precise, not loud, which she found surprising in a man who was clearly irritated. He spoke to the clerk the way someone speaks when they have been patient for a very long time and are reaching the end of what patience has to offer. "I am telling you," Harvey said, laying a hand flat on the counter, "that the northeast corner marker for the Sutton claim was moved. I saw it moved. I watched a man named Cresswell move it with my own eyes, and I am asking for a formal record of my objection before this goes any further." The clerk, a young man named Dorsey who looked perpetually overwhelmed by the demands of his position, shuffled papers, and said something apologetic about the survey record being official and the process for dispute being very particular. "The process," Harvey said, "is being used as a delay tactic while someone steals 40 feet of my eastern fence line, and I would appreciate your acknowledgement of that." Ruby set her folder on the counter beside his. "You will need a witness statement," she said. "If you have a witness who is not yourself, that is the fastest route to a formal objection being entered into the record." Harvey turned and looked at her. His eyes were dark brown, the color of good river soil, and they assessed her without apology. "And you are Ruby Grayson. I have the claim adjacent to the Whitfield parcel on the North Road, and I have surveying experience, so if you need someone to reestablish your boundary markers with documentation that will hold up in the land office, I can do it, provided you are willing to pay for the work." Harvey stared at her for a moment, not rudely. More the way a person stares at something unexpected that has solved a problem they did not know how to solve. "How much?" he said. $5 and a fair description of who moved the marker and why, so I know what I am walking into," she said. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, more like the beginning of respect. "Harvey Sutton," he said, and offered his hand. She shook it with a firm grip. "I know," she said. "I heard your name 3 times while you were arguing. That was how it started. Not with romance, which neither of them was looking for, but with a surveying job on a cold January afternoon when the ground was iron-hard, and the boundary dispute was very real, and Ruby Grayson walked Harvey Sutton's fence line with a measuring chain and her father's compass, and documented everything with the meticulous clarity that her father had spent years teaching her. She was thorough and she was quiet while she worked, and Harvey, who had hired various men for various jobs over 4 years of building his ranch from nothing, found that he could not stop watching her. Not in an inappropriate way at first, more in the way you watch someone do something they are genuinely skilled at, with that particular satisfaction of observing competence. Ruby moved along the fence line with her notebook open, making notations, taking compass bearings, measuring distances between posts. Her dark hair was pinned up under a wide-brimmed hat, and her coat was practical rather than fashionable, and she frowned at the ground with an intensity that would have been comical if it had not been so clearly effective. "The marker was here," she said, stopping near a rocky outcrop. She crouched and swept aside some loose soil with her gloved hand. "You can see the original post hole. The fill is recent. Someone tamped it back down, but not well. The new marker is 14 feet east of where this original post sat." Harvey crouched beside her, close enough that he could smell the cold air on her coat, and faintly, beneath it, something like cedar. He looked at the ground and saw exactly what she was describing. "That is on Cresswell's order," he said. "He has been trying to push the boundary since last fall." "Who is Cresswell?" Ruby asked, standing and writing in her notebook. "My neighboring claim to the east. He is backed by a land syndicate out of St. Louis that is buying up homestead claims in this county and consolidating them. They have been doing it through boundary manipulation, legal delays, and occasionally through methods I would describe as considerably less legal." Harvey stood as well. "He has already taken 2 homesteaders off their claims this year, the widow Abrams and a man named Fontaine." Ruby's pencil stopped moving. She looked up. "How?" The widow was frightened off. "Fontaine was served with fraudulent documentation claiming his original claim was invalid due to a technicality in the filing that was manufactured after the fact." Harvey's jaw tightened. "The syndicate has someone inside the land office, maybe more than one someone. I have suspected it for months, but I cannot prove it." Ruby looked at him for a long moment. The wind moved through the scrub grass around them, cold and carrying the smell of distant snow. "That is a significant thing to tell someone you met 3 hours ago," she said. "You asked who he was," Harvey said simply. "I told you. You are working on my land now, and if there is a danger here, you have a right to know it." Ruby closed her notebook. She looked out over the land, brown and vast and beautiful in the harsh winter light, and she felt the particular combination of things she always felt when confronted with a challenge that had sharp edges: a tightening across her shoulders, a clarity in her thinking, and underneath it all, a stubborn warmth that she had always privately identified as the feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be. "I have a claim on the North Road," she said, "adjacent to the Whitfield parcel." "I know it," Harvey said. "Whitfield sold last spring. The claim next to it has been empty for 2 years. It was my father's. He filed it and never got to work it." She kept her voice even. "I have until October of this year to prove it up under the Homestead Act. That means I need to break ground, build a structure, and show improvements, or the claim reverts." Harvey looked at her. "That is a significant amount of work for one person." "Yes," Ruby said, "it is." She said it without complaint and without invitation for pity, simply as a statement of the situation. Then she put her notebook in her coat pocket and picked up the end of the measuring chain. "Let us finish documenting this boundary and get your objection filed before Cresswell has time to muddy the record further." They worked until the light started to go, Ruby measuring and noting, and Harvey holding stakes and marking positions as she directed him. And when they were done, she had a document that was precise enough to survive scrutiny in any land office that was not actively corrupt. She gave him the survey notes that evening, and he paid her the $5 and added 2 more without being asked, because the work had been worth considerably more than $5, and he was not a man who underpaid fair labor. Ruby took the money without comment. She did not say thank you for the extra $2, which was the correct response, and Harvey noticed that she did not say it and found that he respected her more for the absence. He thought about her on the ride home, not in a way he examined closely, just a persistent awareness, like a new sound in the house that you find yourself listening for even when you are not thinking about it. February in Colfax County was brutal in the particular way that high desert winters are brutal. Not the worst cold in the world, but relentless and deeply uncomfortable, with wind that found every gap in your clothing and ground too hard to work. Ruby spent the first half of the month in town, staying at the Elkins Hotel on credit she had arranged with the proprietress. a pragmatic woman named Mrs. Clara Hadley, who had been in Cimarron long enough to recognize a person who would honor a debt when she saw one. Ruby worked the land office every day, not the surveying work but the reading work. She went through the public record of filings and disputes in Colfax County with the same methodical attention she had applied to Harvey's boundary, building herself a map of the legal landscape that she would be operating in. She identified 4 claims adjacent to or near her own that had been subject to challenge. She identified the pattern of the syndicate's tactics, which were clever and patient, and depended on homesteaders not having the legal knowledge to recognize what was being done to them until it was too late. She also found Harvey Sutton's claim file. He had been in Colfax County for 4 years, having arrived in the spring of 1874 from Missouri with his younger brother Daniel. The land office record told her he had built a house, a barn, fenced his grazing land, maintained continuous residence, and filed all his paperwork correctly and on time. He had done everything right, which was perhaps why the syndicate was now trying to take back what they could not claim outright. She was reading the file for the second time when she heard someone sit down across from her at the reading table and looked up to find Harvey himself, with a cup of coffee from the hotel dining room and an expression that suggested he had not expected to find her here either. "Miss Grayson," he said. "Mr. Sutton," she said. He looked at the files spread in front of her. He looked at her. "You are researching the syndicate," he said. "I am researching my situation," she said. "Which includes understanding the syndicate." He was quiet for a moment. Then he set the coffee down. "I have been doing the same thing since last fall. I have accumulated a considerable amount of documentation." He paused. "It would be more efficient if we compared notes." Ruby looked at him steadily. She had been managing her affairs independently since her father died, which had been necessary and which she was good at, but she was not a person who refused efficiency on principle. "All right," she said. They spent 3 hours at that table comparing what each of them knew, and by the end of it they had a clearer picture of the syndicate's operation than either of them had assembled alone. The syndicate, which called itself the Continental Land Development Company, had a representative in Cimarron named Wallace Pryor, who presented himself as an independent land agent, and had his name on at least 2 suspicious transactions in the county record. Pryor was the visible part of the operation. The man inside the land office was almost certainly the head clerk, a man named Sims who had been in his position for 3 years and had inexplicably improved his personal financial circumstances substantially in the last 18 months. "If Sims is manipulating the record from the inside," Harvey said, keeping his voice low, "then a formal dispute filed through the standard process is vulnerable. He can delay it, misdirect it, make documents disappear." "Then we need a second record," Ruby said. "Independent documentation that cannot be accessed or altered by anyone in the land office. A competing record that establishes the true positions of boundary markers and the true state of filings at specific dates, held somewhere outside his reach." Harvey looked at her. "You are talking about building a parallel documentation system." "I am talking about protecting our claims," she said. "Both of them, possibly others. There are 4 other homesteaders on this road who are in the same position and do not know it yet." Harvey was quiet for a moment. He was looking at her with that particular attention again, the one that was not quite a stare and not quite an assessment but something between those things that she had not yet found a name for. "You came here to prove up one homestead claim," he said. "Now you are talking about protecting a road full of them." "My father believed that land was the foundation of a decent life," Ruby said. "He spent 20 years surveying this territory so that other people could find their footing. I did not come out here just to hold what he built. I came out here to do something worth doing with it." She said it simply, without drama, because it was simply true. Harvey Sutton picked up his coffee and looked at it instead of her for a moment, and she had the distinct impression that he was managing something in his expression that he did not want her to see. "All right, Miss Grayson," he said finally. What do you need?" What she needed, it turned out, was access to his barn, which was a substantial and secure structure with a lockable back room that Harvey had originally intended for storing sensitive equipment. It was on his claim, well off the road, and it was the kind of place where papers could be kept safe. She needed a witness for her documentation work who was trustworthy and legally established in the community, which Harvey was. She needed a mule or a horse to access the far end of her claim efficiently, which Harvey had and was willing to lend. And she needed someone who understood the land and the legal stakes well enough to be a genuine partner in this work rather than a hired hand. Harvey Sutton, it emerged, was all of those things. They fell into a working arrangement that was entirely practical and which, over the course of February and March, became something considerably less easily categorized. The snow broke in late February and the ground softened at the edges, and Ruby began the brutal work of improving her claim in earnest. She had the tools, the knowledge, and the absolute determination. What she lacked was time and muscle, and the two tended to compound each other's deficits. Breaking ground on high desert soil was different from the bottomland surveying she had done with her father. The ground was rocky and resistant, and a woman working alone with a hand plow could make progress but not fast progress. Harvey showed up on her claim on the first Monday of March with a team of horses and a better plow and said simply, "I have the day. Let us break the south field." Ruby, who was already at work and was dirty and tired from 2 hours of effort, looked at him and the team and the plow and said, "You have your own work." "I do," he said, "and I will get back to it tomorrow. Today I have the day." She might have argued further, but the south field represented 6 hours of improvement that she desperately needed and could not afford to turn down. So she accepted with a brief nod and went back to work directing the effort while Harvey managed the team. They did not talk much while they worked, which Ruby appreciated. She had encountered men who filled working silence with chatter that was intended to be charming and functioned only as distraction. Harvey was quiet in the manner of someone genuinely focused on the task at hand, and when he did speak it was useful. A question about where she wanted the rows, an observation about a rocky patch that would need clearing, a suggestion about drainage based on the way the land lay. By mid-afternoon the south field was broken and the light was long and golden over the high desert, and they sat on the fence rail with water from her canteen, and Ruby looked at the turned earth and felt a surge of something fierce and grateful that she kept entirely inside. "Thank you," she said. It was not a small thing coming from her. Harvey looked out at the field too. "Your father did good work picking this land," he said. "The soil is deeper than it looks. Good drainage. This will produce." It was exactly the right thing to say, not about her, about the land, about her father's judgment. Ruby pressed her lips together and looked at the horizon and breathed. Harvey did not look at her. He seemed to understand that she needed him not to look at her for a moment, and he gave her that without being asked. She thought about that later, lying awake in her room at the Elkins Hotel with the wind outside and the sound of the street quieting down for the night. She thought about how he had given her that moment of privacy without her asking for it, the way you only do that for someone you are paying close enough attention to that you notice what they need before they have to name it. It was a dangerous kind of attention to be receiving from a man she was not interested in entangling herself with. She had come here to work, not to complicate her life with someone else's feelings or her own. She had too much to accomplish before October. She did not have room for this. She told herself all of that very firmly, and then lay awake another hour thinking about the way he had looked at the turned earth and called it good. April arrived and brought wildflowers and warmer days, and the first genuine test of everything they had been quietly building. Wallace Pryor came to Ruby's claim on the 4th of April, which was a Tuesday, in the company of a man she had not seen before who wore a suit and carried a leather satchel that suggested legal documentation. Pryor was a compact, well-dressed man in his 40s, with the manner of someone who had practiced appearing reasonable until it was completely convincing. He smiled at Ruby when she came to the door of her newly completed one-room structure, and he told her that the Continental Land Development Company had identified a potential irregularity in the original filing of the Thomas Grayson claim. Ruby listened to all of it without changing her expression. She was holding a mug of coffee, and she held it throughout his speech, and she said, when he was done, "What specific irregularity?" Pryor produced a document from the satchel. It was a copy of the original filing with a notation on it that Ruby had never seen before. "Your father's filing was made in October of 1876, Pryor said, "but there is a question about the witnessing. The witness signature appears to be irregular, which may affect the validity of the original claim." Ruby looked at the document. She recognized her father's handwriting, his surveyor's seal, and the signature of the witness, who had been a land office clerk named Alvarez who had since moved to Albuquerque. She also recognized, with cold clarity, that the notation claiming irregularity was not original to the document. The ink was slightly different. The handwriting of the notation did not match the hand of the original clerk. "This notation is not original to this document," she said. Pryor's smile did not waver. "I am not in a position to attest to the document's complete history. I surveyed this land with my father the summer before he died," Ruby said. "I have his field notes and his original compass bearings and his survey records, including a copy of this filing with his own notation on the back, dated the same week, in which he recorded the name, position, and county of his witness. That notation is not in my copy." The suited man with the satchel looked at Pryor. Pryor's smile softened into something that was almost genuine. "Miss Grayson, the company is prepared to offer a very fair price. Please leave my claim," Ruby said. She closed the door. She stood with her back against it for 30 seconds, breathing carefully, cataloging the cold fear in her chest, and then setting it aside because fear was not going to be useful right now. Then she got her coat and her hat and she walked the mile to Harvey Sutton's ranch. She found him in the barn repairing a harness, and she told him everything Pryor had said and shown her, precisely and without embellishment. Harvey listened without interrupting. When she was done, he set down the harness. "The notation in the filing copy," he said. "You are certain it was added. The ink composition is different. The handwriting is different from the original clerk's. And I have my father's private copy of the same document without that notation." She had the private copy with her in her coat, because she had taken to carrying the most critical documents on her person after the conversation about Sims 2 months ago. Harvey looked at the document she spread on his workbench and then looked at the notation. He got very still in the way she had come to associate with him being deeply angry. "This is Sims," he said quietly. "He altered the archived copy. They have been waiting for an opportunity to use it. The question is whether they have done it to anyone else and gotten away with it," Ruby said. "If they have a precedent." "We need an attorney," Harvey said. "Not the county attorney, who I do not trust. There is a man in Santa Fe named Beaumont who handles land law and who is not affiliated with anyone up here. I have had his name for 2 months, meaning to use it. Can you get him here in time? I can send a telegraph today." He was already moving, taking off his work apron. "And I have your father's survey records from the filing in the locked room. You gave me copies in February. That notation is going to look very interesting when compared to those." It was in that moment, watching Harvey Sutton move with that decisive efficiency, pulling on his coat, already thinking 3 steps ahead in her defense, that Ruby Grayson felt the foundation of something shift under her in a way that was not at all related to land disputes. She looked away. She looked at the harness on the workbench, half mended, and she thought about the fact that he had dropped his own work without hesitation, without calculation, without asking what it was worth to her. She did not examine the feeling any further. She put her hat back on and said, "I will go with you to send the telegraph." May was the month the whole situation became dangerous in a different way, and it had nothing to do with Wallace Pryor or the syndicate. Harvey had ridden out to check on Ruby's claim on a Thursday afternoon, which he had started doing 3 times a week under the arrangement they had never formally articulated. and he found her on the roof of her structure repairing a section of roofing that had been damaged in a spring storm. She was entirely competent at heights, clearly, and had no need of assistance, but she was also 15 feet off the ground on a ladder that was not as stable as it should have been, and the sight of it did something to Harvey's chest that he found difficult to dismiss as concern for a business associate. He steadied the ladder without saying anything and held it while she worked. She did not thank him until she was back on the ground, but she also did not tell him to let go, which he took as acknowledgement that she did not mind the help. When she came down, she was close, and the afternoon light was doing something unreasonable with the dust on her cheek and the loose strands of dark hair at her temple. And Harvey Sutton, who had been a careful and practical man since the death of his wife 3 years ago, had taught him the particular terror of caring too much for something that could be taken, found himself in the specific and dangerous moment of knowing that careful and practical had already become insufficient. He stepped back. He looked at the repaired roof with the expression of a man examining masonry. "Good patch," he said. "Thank you," Ruby said, rolling down her sleeves. She looked at him sidelong with that assessment that he had never quite gotten comfortable with. "You are quiet today." "I am often quiet," he said. "More so," she said, without particular emphasis, and turned to put her tools away. Harvey stayed to help her clear the storm debris from around the structure, and they worked in that companionable silence that had become one of his privately treasured things in recent months. And when he rode home, he rode slowly and looked at the stars coming out over the desert and acknowledged to himself, in the honest privacy of his own mind, that he was in serious trouble. He had not told Ruby about Clara, about his wife, who had died of typhoid in 1875, 18 months after they came out to the territory from Missouri, when Daniel was 17 and Harvey was 24, and the ranch was barely established, and everything had fallen apart in the particular quiet way that grief falls apart. Not loudly, not all at once, but steadily, piece by piece, until you found yourself rebuilt into someone who did not take large risks with his heart, because the cost of losing had been thoroughly established. He had not told her because it had not come up, and because he was not a person who offered his history to people he was not sure of. He was becoming very sure of Ruby Grayson, in the way you become sure of the ground under your feet on familiar land. That sureness was exactly what frightened him. He thought about telling her, and then he thought about what telling her would mean, the implicit revelation of how much he had come to feel, which was more than the careful working arrangement they had established warranted. He was not ready to put that in words. He was not sure he had the right. He thought about all of this and then went to bed and lay awake long enough that Daniel, who was 21 and perceptive and had been watching the whole situation develop with increasing and only partially concealed amusement, knocked on his door and said through it, "Harvey, if you are thinking about her again, you should just tell her." "Go to sleep, Daniel," Harvey said. "I am just saying," Daniel said through the door. "I know what you are saying," Harvey said. "Good night." He heard his brother's quiet laugh retreating down the hall, and he stared at the ceiling for another long while before sleep finally came. The attorney Beaumont arrived from Santa Fe in mid-May, and proved to be everything Harvey had hoped, a meticulous, sharp-minded man of 50, who had been fighting land fraud cases in the New Mexico territory for 15 years, and who recognized the syndicate's method immediately upon reviewing the documents Ruby and Harvey had assembled. "This is well documented," he said, spreading the papers across the table in Harvey's kitchen, where he and Ruby and Harvey and Daniel sat in the lamplight. He tapped the comparison between Ruby's private copy of the filing and the altered, archived version. "The alteration is significant and provable. The question is whether we can establish a pattern. We have 7 other instances of potential alteration or manipulation in the county record," Ruby said, pushing her own documentation forward. "I have surveyed 3 of the affected claims personally and compiled the discrepancies." Beaumont looked at her over his reading glasses. "You surveyed them yourself." "My father was the county's primary independent surveyor for 12 years, Ruby said. I learned the work at his side from the age of 10. I have his instruments and his methods." Beaumont looked at Harvey. Harvey said nothing because there was nothing to add. Ruby's credentials spoke for themselves. "If I can file a complaint with the Territorial Land Commissioner in Santa Fe," Beaumont said, "with this level of documentation, I can get a federal review initiated. That puts a hold on any claim disputes in this county until the review is complete. It also puts the clerk Sims under scrutiny in a way that makes it very difficult for him to continue manipulating the record." "How long will that take?" Ruby asked. "Filing the complaint, 2 weeks. Review initiation, another month, perhaps 6 weeks, but the hold on disputes is immediate once the complaint is accepted." Ruby did the calculation. She had until October to prove up. A 2-month hold on disputes bought her considerable breathing room. She looked at Harvey, who was already looking at her with an expression that meant he had done the same calculation and reached the same conclusion. "File it," they said, almost simultaneously. There was a brief pause. Daniel made a small sound that was quickly converted into a cough. Beaumont looked between them and said nothing, but his mouth twitched. Pryor came back to Ruby's claim in the first week of June, this time without the suited man, and he came differently. He came in the evening when the light was low, and he knocked with a different energy than his previous visit, not the polished official visit of a man presenting documents, but the harder knock of a man conveying a message. Ruby opened the door and saw him and did not open it fully. "Mr. Pryor, Miss Grayson," he was not smiling this time. "I understand you have engaged an attorney. That is correct. I want you to understand the situation clearly," he said. "The company has significant interests in this county. People who create complications for those interests tend to find that their own complications multiply." Ruby looked at him steadily. She had lived through a year of grief and uncertainty and brutal physical work and legal manipulation, and she was not afraid of a man on her doorstep making implicit threats in a pleasant tone of voice. "Is that a threat, Mr. Pryor?" "It is an observation," he said. "Then observe this," she said. "I have documentation of your company's activities in this county that is currently in the possession of an attorney in Santa Fe, and copies of which are held in 3 separate locations in this territory. If anything happens to my claim, my property, or my person, that documentation goes to the Territorial Commissioner, the Federal Land Office in Washington, and every newspaper in the territory that will print it." She paused. "Good evening." She closed the door. She stood on the inside of it, her hand flat against the wood, and counted her own heartbeats until they steadied. Then she lit the lamp and sat down at her table and wrote a detailed account of the conversation, and sent it to Beaumont the next morning. Harvey rode over that evening, which had become something he did regularly now on no particular schedule, and with no particular stated reason, and she told him about Pryor's visit. Harvey listened, and his expression went through several things she had learned to read: concern, then anger, then a careful steadiness that she recognized as the version of himself he deployed when emotion needed to be managed for practical purposes. "You should not be out here alone at night," he said. "I have been out here alone at night every night since March," she said. "Before Pryor started making direct threats," he said. She looked at him. "I can manage my own safety, Harvey." He looked back at her. It was one of the few times he had used her given name, which both of them registered. "I know you can. I am not suggesting otherwise. I am saying that there is a difference between managing it alone and managing it with someone watching the road. And you propose to watch the road. Daniel can. He is young enough that sleeping in a barn loft does not bother him, and he is reliable and capable of raising an alarm if something warrants it." Ruby was quiet for a moment. She wanted to object on principle, because accepting that kind of help meant acknowledging a vulnerability she was not comfortable with. But she was also honest enough with herself to know that Pryor's visit had rattled her more than she had shown, and that Harvey's concern was not paternalism but practicality. "For 2 weeks," she said, "while Beaumont's complaint is being processed. After that the situation should change." "For 2 weeks," Harvey agreed, and she could tell that he found her terms acceptable not because they were the terms he would have set but because they were her terms and he respected them. It was a small thing. It was the kind of small thing that accumulates. Daniel did sleep in the loft over her small barn for 2 weeks, and he did it cheerfully and without complaint. And during that time, Ruby came to know Harvey's brother as a distinct and genuinely pleasant person, quick-witted and enthusiastic about nearly everything, with a laugh that arrived suddenly and completely and disappeared just as fast. He helped her with the fence work in the mornings before riding back to help Harvey with the ranch, and he talked freely about their life in Missouri, about their childhood, about Harvey in a way that Harvey never talked about himself. It was from Daniel that Ruby learned about Clara. She had not asked. Daniel mentioned her in the middle of a story about the early days on the ranch, when they had arrived with almost nothing and built everything from scratch, and he said, Harvey was different before Clara died. Not worse, just more open. He used to laugh more. She was the kind of person who made you want to laugh. Ruby kept her hands on the fence wire she was working with and said carefully, he lost her here. Typhoid, spring of 1875. Harvey did not leave the ranch for 6 weeks after. Daniel looked at the middle distance, the way young men look when they are talking about something that marked them. He built that second barn that summer, just to have something to do with his hands. He was not the same after for a long time. He is better now, closer to himself. He paused and then looked at her with an expression that was casual enough to be deliberate. He is better since last winter, actually. Ruby did not respond to the implication. She kept working. But that night in her small house, she thought about Harvey Sutton building a barn with his grief, and she thought about what it meant to lose someone in a place where everything around you held their memory, and she thought about how he had looked at her land when he said it would produce, and something in her chest ached in a way she did not permit herself to examine too closely. July was hot and demanding and full of actual work, which was a relief because it left less room for other things. Beaumont's complaint was filed and accepted, and the Territorial Land Commissioner sent a representative to Cimarron in late July, which sent immediate reverberations through the community. Sims was suspended from his position pending inquiry. Pryor went quiet in the way of a man recalibrating. The syndicate did not disappear, but it retreated to its legal operations and away from the direct pressure tactics, which was enough for the moment. Ruby broke ground on her second field in mid-July and planted winter wheat in the first, which was an aggressive timeline but achievable. Harvey helped her with the second field clearing, and this time she did not debate whether to accept the help, simply handed him a tool when he arrived and said, the east end has a rocky section, and they fell to work together the way they had been falling to work for months now, in that particular easy synchrony that felt like something that had always existed and had only recently been located. One evening in late July they were sitting on the fence rail again, which had become an unofficial location for their end-of-day conversations, watching the last of the light go orange on the mesa, and Harvey said with no particular preamble, I was married before. Ruby turned to look at him. Her name was Clara, he said. He was looking at the horizon. She died in the spring of 75, typhoid. He paused. I thought you should know. Daniel likely mentioned it because Daniel mentions things, but I wanted you to hear it from me. Daniel did mention it, Ruby said carefully. I am sorry for your loss, Harvey nodded. He was quiet for a moment. She was kind, he said, genuinely kind in a way that was not performance. She found good things where other people would not have thought to look. Another pause. I closed myself off considerably after. I did not think I would be the kind of person who opened again. Ruby watched him. The orange light was fading to rose and the air was cooling and the night birds were beginning their calls in the scrub. And now, she asked very quietly. Harvey turned and looked at her. His expression was the particular open, unguarded thing she rarely saw from him, stripped of the careful management he usually maintained. Now I am less sure that closing was as permanent as I thought it was, he said. It was not a declaration. It was not even particularly close to one. It was an honest thing said in an honest voice, and it asked nothing and offered something nonetheless. Ruby felt it move through her the way something enormous and quiet moves through you, the way you feel the first warmth of spring on your skin after a very long winter. She looked back at the horizon. She did not say anything for a long moment, because anything she said right now would matter, and she wanted to be sure of what she meant. "I came out here," she finally said, "with the single-minded intention of keeping my father's land and making it something that honored the work he put into it. I was not planning on anything else." "I know," Harvey said. "I am telling you that because I want you to understand that what I am about to say is not something I say lightly." She looked at him again. "I am glad you are here. I have been glad of it for longer than I have admitted to myself. And I am—" She stopped, started again. "I am not certain what that means for either of us, but I thought you should know it." Harvey held her gaze for a moment that was long enough to feel like a conversation. Then slowly, he reached over and covered her hand where it rested on the fence rail with his own. He did not grip it. He simply placed his hand over hers, warm and still, and she looked at their hands and then back at the horizon, and neither of them spoke for a while, and it was the best version of silence Ruby had experienced in a very long time. August was a revelation. August was the month they stopped being careful with each other in the way that people are careful when they are afraid of what the other person means to them. It happened in small steps, the way all the important things had happened between them, incrementally and without announcement. Harvey started coming over in the evenings not to work but simply to be there, bringing things. A book he thought she might want, extra apples from his trees, once a package from the general store that turned out to contain a new compass, because her father's old one had a crack in the crystal that she had mentioned once in passing, and clearly never expected him to remember. Ruby opened the box and held the compass and looked at it with an expression that Harvey recognized by now as the version of her that had been moved but was not going to demonstrate it conventionally, and then she looked up at him with eyes that were very bright and said, "This was not necessary." "I know," he said. "Thank you," she said, and this time it carried everything the phrase usually carried when she said it, which was considerably more than the words themselves. She kissed him for the first time on an evening in mid-August when they were standing in her doorway, and the moon was full, and she had been watching him say good night with that careful gentleness he always deployed, and she had decided, quite simply, that she was done waiting to see if he would do it first. She rose on her toes and kissed him, brief and firm and clear, and felt his whole body go still with a surprised kind of gladness. And then his hand came up to her jaw very gently, and he kissed her back in a way that was not brief at all, in a way that held months of accumulated restraint and care, and all the things neither of them had said outright. And when they stepped back from each other, the night air felt different, charged and new. "I have been wanting to do that for about 5 months," Ruby said. Harvey laughed, a real, complete laugh, the kind Daniel had told her about, the kind that arrived suddenly and entirely, and she felt that laugh move through her chest like good news. "I should have done it sooner," he said. "You were very careful," she said. "I was terrified," he said, with the particular honesty he reserved for things that were actually true. "I know," she said. "I was too." September arrived, and with it the particular harvest urgency of the homestead, and Ruby worked with a driven energy that Harvey had come to recognize as her at her most alive. The Territorial Land Commissioner's review was nearly complete. Sims had been formally removed from his position and referred for criminal investigation. Beaumont sent word that the fraudulent notation on Ruby's original filing had been officially identified and expunged, the original claim restored to full validity. 3 other homesteaders' claims had been similarly cleared. Pryor had left Cimarron entirely, which suggested that the syndicate had decided to cut its losses in this particular county. Everything Ruby had come here to accomplish was being accomplished. It was in this context, in the first week of September, that the Harker parcel came available. The Harker family had been on their claim for 5 years, but Mr. Harker had died in the spring and Mrs. Harker had family in Kansas and was returning to them, and the land was being offered for sale at a price that was fair and occasionally prompted Harvey to look at it with the expression of a man calculating something. Ruby noticed this and asked him about it one evening. "It is very good bottomland," he said. "The creek that runs through it would be significant for the ranch. I have been thinking about it." "You should go look at it," she said. "I plan to," he said. He went to look at it. He came back thoughtful. He walked the creek and stood on the southern field and looked at the lay of the land, and he thought about the ranch and what it needed, and what the Harker parcel represented. It was objectively the best land in the county for his purposes, better than anything else available. A creek, good bottomland, easy access to the road, and a solid structure already on it. He also thought about the fact that it was 8 miles from Ruby's claim. 8 miles was not an enormous distance. People lived further from their neighbors and managed fine. There was nothing to preclude their association if he bought the Harker parcel, nothing practical. He stood in the middle of the Harker field and thought about 8 miles, and then thought about the 1.5 miles between his current claim and Ruby's, and how that 1.5 miles meant he could be there in 12 minutes on horseback, and could see her light from his high pasture on clear nights. And he thought about how that distance had come to be one of the quiet anchors of his daily life, that awareness of proximity. He thought about all of it for a week. He did not tell Ruby he was thinking about it. He did not want her to influence his decision by knowing what it involved, because if she knew that the competing claim was 8 miles away, she might tell him to take it and mean it for practical reasons, and he was not sure he could hear that advice and follow it. He went to see the land agent handling the Harker sale. He told the agent he was interested, but had not decided. The agent told him there was another interested party, but that Harvey's offer, if it came, would be given 48 hours to match before the other party was accepted. Harvey thanked him and went home. He sat in his kitchen that night with a cup of coffee going cold in front of him, and he thought about what he actually wanted. Not what was strategically correct, not what made the most agricultural sense, not what any reasonable observer would recommend. What he actually wanted. He wanted to be close to Ruby Grayson. He wanted the 1.5 miles. He wanted the 12-minute ride, and the light visible from his high pasture, and the evening fence rail, and the knowledge that she was near enough to reach quickly if she needed him. He wanted to stay in the claim adjacent to hers, on land that was good enough to support the ranch, and let someone else have the better creek and the better bottomland, because no creek in Colfax County was worth missing 8 miles of what he was building with her. He went to the land office in the morning and filed for the vacant claim adjacent to Ruby's, on the North Road, on land he had already been working as if it were part of his own for months, because in every way that mattered it already was. He filed it under his name. He paid the fee. He got the deed. He said nothing about the Harker parcel to anyone except the land agent, to whom he sent a brief note declining. He said nothing to Ruby because he was not certain how to say it, because saying it meant saying everything else it implied, which was that she had become the central fact of his life, and that every decision he made now had her in its geometry, and that was a significant thing to admit to someone even when you already knew they felt it too. He was going to tell her. He simply needed to find the right moment, and the right moment kept being occupied by other things: harvest work, fence repair, Daniel's enthusiastic commentary on the situation, and his own uncertainty about how such a thing is said without making a woman who valued her independence feel that she was being managed by someone else's choices. He had not expected Dorsey the clerk to file the deed before he had a chance to say anything. He had not expected Dorsey to hand Ruby the deed by accident on the 14th of September, when she came in to pick up her own final certification documents from the commissioner's review, and Dorsey, in the fluttering confusion of a very busy morning, handed her the wrong envelope. And so the deed landed on the table between them, and Ruby Grayson stared at Harvey Sutton's name written over a description of land she now understood he had chosen specifically, deliberately, and in the full knowledge of what he was giving up to make that choice. "You gave up the better land," she said, "for the chance of me." "For the chance of you," he said. "That is the honest answer." Ruby stood at the window of the assay office for a long moment, looking out at the street of Cimarron, at the town she had come to know, and the territory she had come to love, at the life she had built here from her father's dream and her own stubbornness, and 8 months of work that had taught her more about herself than 26 years of easier living had managed. She turned around and looked at Harvey Sutton, who was standing near the door with his hat in his hand, watching her with those dark, careful, completely open eyes. "You should have told me," she said. "I know it," he said. "I was trying to work out how. You were afraid I would tell you not to." "Yes." "Would it have mattered?" she asked. "If I had said do not do it, take the better land, do not make this choice for my sake?" Harvey was quiet for a moment, with the quality of honesty that she had come to know as the sign that what followed would be completely true. "I would have heard you," he said, "and then I would have thought about it for a long time, and I expect I would have done it anyway." Something in Ruby's chest opened like a door that had been closed for a very long time. She crossed the room. She walked straight to him, past the table with the deed and the papers and the evidence of everything they had built together, and she put her hand against his chest where his heart was, and she felt it beating under her palm, steady and solid and fast. "Harvey Sutton," she said quietly. "Ruby Grayson," he said, and his voice was low and everything was in it. "I have been trying," she said, "to think of a single reason why you and I should not do this completely." "Have you found one?" he asked. "No," she said. "I have not." He covered her hand on his chest with both of his, carefully, the way he did everything, and he said, "I have been thinking about that too. For considerably longer than I should have been." "Ask me," she said. "Ruby," he looked at her steadily. "I am not a man who says things he does not mean, so I will say this once and clearly. I love you. I have loved you since about February, if I am being honest, which I should have been much sooner. And I would like to spend a very long time being where you are, on whatever land that happens to be, and I am asking you formally and with all the intention I have whether you would consider marrying me." Ruby looked at him. She looked at his face, which she had memorized without intending to, every line and angle of it, the particular quality of his attention and his humor and his steadiness. She thought about her father's claim and his compass, now on her belt, and how she had come out here to honor his work and had found something her father would have considered considerably more valuable than proved-up homestead land. "Yes," she said, "I would consider it. I have considered it. The answer is yes." Harvey Sutton kissed her in the assay office on the 14th of September, 1878, with Dorsey the clerk pretending very busily to find something important behind the counter. And it was considerably better than the first time they had kissed, which had already been excellent, because this time there was nothing held back and no question about what it meant. They were married in October, in the church that had been under construction when Ruby rode into Cimarron 9 months before, which had been completed in June, and which now held everyone they had come to know in Colfax County. Daniel, who could not stop grinning, Mrs. Clara Hadley from the hotel, Attorney Beaumont, who had ridden up from Santa Fe, because Ruby had sent him an invitation, and he had said in his reply that he would not miss it. 3 of the homesteaders whose claims they had helped protect, and a good portion of the town, because Harvey Sutton had been here for 4 years and was well regarded. And Ruby Grayson had been here for 9 months, and was already respected in the particular way that people respect someone who shows up and does the work and protects the community while they are at it. The ceremony was not elaborate. The preacher was a straightforward man who said the words plainly and without embellishment, and Harvey and Ruby stood before him and said their own words, which they had both written themselves, because neither of them was given to the conventional if something more specific was available. Harvey said, I came to this territory alone and built what I could from it, and I thought that was enough. And then you walked into the land office and told me my dispute strategy was inefficient, and I realized that enough and sufficient are different things. You are the person I want beside me for every difficulty and every good day this life has left to offer, and I mean to be beside you for the same." Ruby said, "I came here with my father's tools and his claim and the intention of honoring his work, and I found that the work was bigger than I expected and better than I expected, and that I was not going to be able to do it without someone who was willing to hold a stake while I took measurements, in every sense of that. You are the person who showed up without being asked and stayed without being invited and turned down the better land to remain close to mine, and I would not have believed that about you if I had not seen the deed. I love you, Harvey Sutton, and I am grateful for you every single day." There was a particular quality of silence in the church when she finished. That was the kind of silence that descends on a room when something true has been said in front of everyone. Then Daniel made an audible sound that was definitely not a sob, and Beaumont cleared his throat, and Mrs. Hadley was not remotely embarrassed about crying, and the preacher pronounced them married with what might have been a smile larger than was strictly liturgically necessary. They celebrated at the Elkins Hotel, with a supper that Mrs. Hadley had organized with the cheerful authority of a woman who had been waiting for this development since approximately March, and was not going to let it go unacknowledged. There was food and music, a fiddler from the saloon who turned out to be genuinely excellent, and conversation that ran long into the evening, and Harvey danced with Ruby with the particular careful attention he gave to things he wanted to do correctly, and Ruby danced with him with her face tipped up and her eyes bright, and Daniel danced with everyone indiscriminately, and managed to knock over 2 glasses of cider without breaking his excellent mood. Late in the evening, Ruby and Harvey sat together at the edge of the celebration with their shoulders touching, watching the room, and Ruby said quietly, "I have one question I still want to ask you." "Ask it," Harvey said. "The Harker parcel. Do you regret it?" Harvey looked at her. Not at the room, not at the fiddler, not at Daniel, who was currently attempting to teach Mrs. Hadley a dance step she had not asked to learn. At her. "Not for a single moment," he said. "Not once." Ruby nodded slowly. She took his hand the way he had taken hers on the fence rail in July, simply and without ceremony. "Good," she said. "That is the only answer I would have accepted." Harvey laughed, that sudden, complete laugh, and kissed her temple, and she leaned her head briefly against his shoulder with the ease of someone who has found the place they fit. They worked both claims through that winter and into the next spring, which meant considerable labor and considerable logistics, but they managed it with the same efficient complementarity that had characterized everything they had done together since January. Harvey's ranch was well established and his cattle were producing, and Ruby's land was proving exactly as fertile as she had believed it would be. The winter wheat came up strong, and she expanded into a second crop rotation, and by spring they had the clearest, most documented claim in Colfax County, which Beaumont confirmed from Santa Fe was now about as bulletproof as homestead land could be. Daniel was a constant and beloved presence in their household, doing his share of the work with good humor, and filling the house with the kind of energy that comes from a young person who is genuinely happy with his life. He had his own ambitions. He wanted to expand into horse breeding, a conversation that Harvey engaged with seriously, and Ruby found herself contributing to with suggestions about record-keeping and sales networks that surprised Daniel and should not have, given who she was. In the spring of 1879, Ruby told Harvey at the breakfast table, in the same plain, direct manner she used for all important information, that she was expecting their first child. She watched his face go through several things in rapid succession: surprise, then a wonder so complete it was almost painful to look at, then the careful gladness she recognized as his deepest responses to things that mattered most. He stood up from the table and came around and held her for a long time without saying anything, With that quality of attention he gave to things he was grateful for. And she held on to him, and looked out the kitchen window at the land they had built and felt something she identified, precisely and without ambiguity, as the specific happiness of a life that has turned out better than you dared to plan. Their son was born in November of 1879, in the warmth of their house, with Mrs. Hadley in attendance as a woman who had delivered several babies in her capacity as the most capable practical nurse in Cimarron. He was strong and loud and arrived into the world with a remarkable amount of opinion about the process, and Harvey held him afterward with the concentrated awe of a man holding something precious that he had not expected to deserve, and Ruby watched from the bed, tired and certain and completely at peace. "Thomas," she said, "for my father." Harvey looked at her over the baby's head. "Thomas Harvey Sutton," he said, "if you are amenable." "I am," she said. Daniel, who was waiting in the kitchen and had been pacing in a way that was endearing if somewhat noisy, was brought in to meet his nephew and proceeded to announce to the baby, at some length, all the things they were going to do together when Thomas was old enough, which included fishing in the creek, riding horses, and helping with the horse breeding operation that was now officially underway. Thomas regarded his uncle with large dark eyes and said nothing, which Daniel interpreted as enthusiastic agreement. The year 1880 brought more settlers to Colfax County, which brought more complexity and more need for the kind of careful land documentation that Ruby had made herself the county's leading expert in. She was not working as a hired surveyor exclusively anymore. She had too much of her own land to manage for that. But when the new land commissioner's office reached out to her in the summer of 1880 about contributing to the county survey update, she accepted without hesitation, and Harvey managed the ranch and their land, and Thomas without complaint, while she spent 2 months in the field doing the work she had been trained from childhood to do. She came home from that survey work on an evening in late September with her instruments and her notebooks and her father's compass, and she found Harvey in the kitchen with Thomas on his knee, reading from a book about natural history that the boy was probably too young for, but appeared to find fascinating on the strength of the illustrations. Harvey looked up when she came in, and the way his face changed when he saw her was a thing she had never tired of in 2 years of marriage and did not expect to tire of. "Good survey," he said. "Excellent survey," she said, dropping her bags and kissing the top of Thomas's head and then Harvey's mouth. "The northeast quarter of the county is comprehensively documented for the first time in 5 years. The new commissioner is very pleased." "You look satisfied," Harvey said. "I am," she said. She sat down at the table across from them, taking off her hat, letting the day's weariness settle through her pleasantly. "I am also going to need a larger survey kit if I am going to keep doing this officially, and I have some thoughts about building a proper survey office on the south edge of the property." Harvey looked at her with that particular attention that meant he was genuinely interested in what she was saying. "Tell me," he said. She told him. He listened with Thomas periodically turning pages of the natural history book between them, and the lamp made a warm pool of light in the kitchen, and outside the night was coming down over the high desert, clear and full of stars, and the land was theirs, and the work was good, and the life was, by any honest measure, remarkable. The Continental Land Development Company, which had retreated from Colfax County in 1878, was ultimately the subject of a federal investigation that concluded in 1881, resulting in the formal cancellation of several fraudulent land transfers and the criminal prosecution of 2 of its principals. The former clerk Sims was convicted of fraud and served a term in the territorial prison. Wallace Pryor was never formally charged, but was reportedly practicing land agency in a different territory under circumstances that suggested he had not learned much from the experience. Beaumont wrote from Santa Fe with the news, adding a personal note to Ruby that said he was glad she had come to Colfax County when she did, because the documentation she had assembled in 1878 had proved instrumental in the federal investigation, and had protected homesteaders who would not have known to protect themselves. Ruby read the letter at her desk in the survey office she had built, a good solid structure with proper shelving for the reference documents and an east-facing window for morning light, and she felt the quiet satisfaction of something completed that had mattered. She wrote back to Beaumont and told him that the credit for the documentation belonged equally to Harvey, who had held stakes and kept records and secured papers in a locked room and driven to Santa Fe twice when the situation required it, and who had never once suggested that the fight was too much trouble or that backing down was a reasonable option. Daniel found his footing in the horse breeding operation and was doing well enough by 1881 to file his own homestead claim on a parcel he had identified as ideal for his purposes, a decision that Harvey received with the particular combination of pride and something resembling loss that older siblings experience when the younger ones step fully into their own lives. Ruby watched this with affection and told Harvey over dinner that evening that Daniel was going to be fine. "I know he is," Harvey said. "He is more capable than he gives himself credit for, which is saying something because he gives himself considerable credit." "He learned that from you," Ruby said. Harvey looked at her. "I am not confident that is accurate. You are quietly one of the most capable people I have ever met," Ruby said, with the flat directness she used when she wanted to make something absolutely clear. He watched that for years. It did not escape him. Harvey was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You are the most capable person I have ever met." "We are well matched," Ruby said. "Extraordinarily well matched," Harvey agreed, and there was something in the way he said it, warm and certain and absolutely without qualification, that made the evening feel complete. In the winter of 1881, Ruby told Harvey at the same breakfast table where she had told him about Thomas, with the same plain directness, that they were expecting again. Harvey's response was largely the same as it had been the first time, with the addition of Thomas, now 2 years old, watching his father stand up and hug his mother, and deciding this was interesting enough to require participation, pulling himself up by the tablecloth and extending his arms with the authority of a toddler who expects immediate inclusion. Harvey picked him up without breaking the embrace and held both of them, and Ruby started laughing against his shoulder, and Thomas, satisfied with this resolution, put his hand on his father's face and said the word that had become his preferred all-purpose utterance, which was mine, with complete conviction. Their daughter was born in July of 1882, in the height of summer, with the same vigorous opinion about the process as her brother, which suggested a family pattern was being established. They named her Catherine for Harvey's mother, and she arrived into the world with dark hair and her mother's expression of complete focused determination, which made Harvey laugh when he first saw it and made Daniel say, looking at the baby, "That is already exactly her face." Thomas greeted his sister with the thorough suspicion of a small child encountering a dramatic change in the established order, and then, over the course of about 3 days, shifted his position entirely and became her fiercest advocate, a role he would maintain consistently for the rest of the story. The survey office grew. The ranch grew. The land produced exactly what Ruby had believed it would, which was the vindication of her father's judgment and her own, and she thought of Thomas Grayson on the mornings when the light came over the mesa in a way that made the whole land look like something promised, and she felt him in the weight of the compass on her belt, and in the care she put into her notebooks, and in the particular satisfaction of work done correctly in a place worth working. She stood on the south field on an October morning in 1882, 4 years after the deed had landed on the table in the assay office and changed everything between her and Harvey. She stood in the early light with the compass in her hand, taking a bearing out of habit, because she always took a bearing when she had the compass out, and she heard Harvey behind her on the path from the house. He came up beside her and looked out over the field with her, at the stubble of the harvested wheat and the turned soil ready for the next season, at the clean line of the fence they had maintained together, at the land that had been her father's dream, and had become so much more than that. "What are you looking at?" he asked. "Everything," she said. Harvey put his arm around her shoulders, easy and unhurried, the way he touched her now with a certainty about his welcome that had taken time to build and was now simply the fact of them. She leaned into him briefly, then straightened because she had work to do, and the morning was the best part of the day for the south field measurements. "I need to tell you something," she said. He looked at her. "All right. I found out something from Beaumont's latest letter." She paused. "The Harker parcel was purchased by the syndicate. They are the ones who bought it when you declined." Harvey was quiet. "Beaumont says it is being folded into the fraudulent transfer cases and will likely revert to territorial control," she said, "which means it will come back to market." Harvey looked out at the field. And, Ruby said carefully, "I think we should buy it together. The creek would be useful and the bottomland would expand the wheat operation considerably." Harvey looked at her with an expression she had never quite seen from him before, surprised and tender and slightly undone, all at once. "You want to buy the Harker parcel," he said. "I want us to buy the land you gave up," she said simply. "I want that land to be ours. I think it should be ours. I think it was always supposed to be, and the timeline just took an interesting route to get there." Harvey was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the field, and at the compass in her hand, and at Ruby Grayson, who was his wife and his partner and the person who had taken the most careful and considered decision of his life, and turned it into something neither of them could have planned for in January of 1878 when they shook hands in a land office over a boundary dispute. "Ruby," he said. "Harvey," she said. "Yes," he said, "let us buy the Harker parcel." She nodded with the satisfied efficiency of someone whose proposal has been accepted on reasonable terms, and she turned her compass to take her morning measurement, and Harvey went back to the house to start the coffee and wake the children. And the day began in the way all their best days began, with work and with each other, and with the particular deep-rooted happiness of two people who had found, in a difficult and beautiful territory, exactly what they had not known to look for. They purchased the Harker parcel in the spring of 1883 when it came back to market through the Territorial Land Office, as Beaumont had predicted, and they filed the deed in both their names. Ruby stood at the counter of the land office with a new clerk, a careful young woman named Miss Argello, who had proved herself entirely trustworthy, which was a development Ruby had actively supported and watched their two names recorded together on land that had once been a secret sacrifice and was now simply, clearly, undeniably theirs. Harvey stood beside her. Thomas, 5 years old and accompanying his parents on errands with the self-important air of a child who has been told he is old enough for this, stood between them with a hand in each of theirs, and looked at the process of deed filing with the focused attention of a child who will be a farmer someday and knows it. The clerk handed over the copy and Ruby held it and looked at Harvey and said, "Now it is right." "It has been right for some time," Harvey said, "but yes, now it is official." They walked out of the land office into the October sunlight of Cimarron, which was bright and cool and carried the smell of wood smoke and high desert autumn. And Thomas dropped their hands to run ahead on the boardwalk, the way children run when they are suddenly and completely free. And Harvey took Ruby's hand and held it, and she let him, and they walked in the sunlight together with everything settled and everything ahead. Daniel waved from across the street, where he was coming out of the general store with what appeared to be an unreasonable quantity of supplies for his operation, and he shouted something cheerful across the distance that was mostly absorbed by the street noise, but included the word, "finally," prominently, which made Ruby raise her eyebrows and Harvey shake his head in the fond and resigned way of a man who has long since accepted that his brother will always have the last word. Thomas ran back to report that there was a dog outside the hotel. Life continued in the way of good lives, full and demanding and punctuated by the small, profound moments that you do not recognize as the most important ones until much later. The ranch and the claims flourished in the way that work and attention and genuine care tend to produce. Harvey extended the cattle operation with the bottomland from the Harker parcel, and the winter wheat rotation Ruby had established became the most productive in the county, and the survey office became an institution of sorts, consulted by the new land commissioner's office and by homesteaders who needed documentation they could trust. Beaumont came up from Santa Fe in the spring of 1884 for what he described as a professional consultation, and which was clearly also a visit, and he sat at their kitchen table and ate Catherine's birthday cake, and argued pleasantly with Harvey about territorial land law, while Ruby corrected both of them with references to the county record, and Thomas explained the natural history of horses to anyone who would listen, which was most people. In quiet moments, when the children were in bed and the house was settled into its night sounds, Harvey and Ruby sat on the porch in the high desert dark and looked at the stars, which were extraordinary in this country, and talked or did not talk in that easy companionable way they had developed over years, the way that needed no maintenance because it was the natural state of two people who understood each other deeply. "Do you remember the fence rail?" Ruby said one evening, not to any particular point, just because she was thinking about it. "In July," Harvey said. "Yes. You held my hand and did not say anything for a very long time." "I was trying to determine what was appropriate to say," he said. "And you decided on nothing," she said. "Silence seemed safer than anything I might have said at that moment," he said. "What would you have said?" she asked. Harvey looked at the stars for a moment. "I would have said that I had been looking forward to the end of every day because it meant coming to find you, that I had started making decisions based on proximity to your claim before I had admitted to myself why. That I was thoroughly, completely, and in all likelihood permanently besotted with you, and that I had no idea what to do about it because the last time I felt this way about someone I lost her." Ruby was quiet. She looked at the sky and at the dark outline of the mesa and at the light in Daniel's far window just visible from the porch. "I am glad you held my hand instead," she said. "It was the right call," he agreed. "But I am glad you are saying it now," she said. "Thoroughly, completely, and permanently," he said and looked at her. "Still true." Ruby turned to look at him. This man she had married in a church that had been under construction the day she rode into town, who had held stakes while she took measurements and secured papers in a locked barn room, and ridden to Santa Fe twice on her behalf, and turned down 40 acres of prime bottomland with a creek running through it, because he was not ready to be that far from her. And she thought that there was no measuring instrument precise enough to calculate what that was worth, and that she was grateful every day for the particular accident of a land office dispute, and a cold January afternoon that had put them both in the same room at the same moment. "I love you, Harvey Sutton," she said. "I love you, Ruby Grayson Sutton," he said. "I have loved you since February of 1878, and I will be loving you considerably past the point where it becomes someone else's problem." She laughed. It was a good laugh, full and unguarded, the kind she had not been in the habit of before him. She leaned her head against his shoulder and looked at the stars over Colfax County, over the land that was theirs and the life they had built from a claim and a boundary dispute, and a deed filed on the 14th of September. And she breathed the cool night air and felt, as she always felt in the quietest and truest moments, completely and utterly home. The compass stayed on her belt through all of it. Her father's compass, scratched and heavy and precise, pointing always north, always true. She thought sometimes that Thomas Grayson would have liked Harvey very much, would have shaken his hand in that hearty way he had and said something like, "A man who knows good land when he sees it," which would have meant considerably more than it said. She thought he would have liked all of it. The survey office, and the wheat, and the children, and the Harker parcel finally in the right hands. The whole long, improbable story of what became of his claim and his tools and his daughter, who had come out to the territory to honor his work and had found, entirely beyond what she had planned for, that the best thing she had ever surveyed was not a field boundary or a fence line or a creek bearing, but the territory of a life lived next to the right person, on ground that was good and getting better, in a place and a time that would not come again, measuring the distance carefully and finding it every time to be exactly right.